Try this. Za, 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 za. Hello everybody, it's me, Instructor Mary Z. I am back with another tutorial. Today we are going to talk about the low female voices. This is a clean singing tutorial. We're not really going to be covering harsh vocals today. There is a lot of confusion with vocal ranges. A lot of people out there are afraid of classifying their voice range, or afraid of perhaps the inherent limitations when we talk about range. But we do have set vocal ranges no matter what anybody tries to tell you. It doesn't match physics of sound to say that people can have unlimited ranges. We don't. We're going to talk today about what's the difference between the two types of low, medium voices for women and how to tell which one you are and why that is actually a very liberating and not limiting thing. I just wanted to mention that this video is brought to you by DistroKid. And DistroKid, if you've heard of it, you might not be familiar with it, is a digital distribution service for your music. It can get your music out to your audience on Spotify. These are all the main streaming services. You can't just directly go to Spotify and upload your music the way you can upload things through YouTube. You want to put your music out through a digital distributor who can collect your royalties for you. Digital distributors are amazing because you don't need a record label to get your music out there. There's no more gatekeepers. You can just sign up for a DistroKid account. They actually gave me a link where if you sign up through my link below in the description, you'll get a 7% discount off your first year membership. One of the biggest benefits that DistroKid has to offer, in my opinion, is their cover licensing. They make it incredibly easy compared to other digital distribution services to license a cover song legally, and so that you're not essentially selling music that belongs to someone else. So this is a huge thing for all of my vocal students and clients who are trying to put their music out there. Maybe they finally have their first band album. Maybe you finally have a YouTube channel and a bunch of covers you'd like to have available just as audio. I've had a great experience using them with the band that I sing for, Helium Prime. We distribute through DistroKid, so check it out. The link is below in the description and get 7% off your first year membership. Why is it a myth that you could just have an unlimited vocal range? It is pretty unethical to tell someone something that doesn't match the reality of the physics of sound. Believe me, if there was a way to take my very low voice and turn it into a soprano voice, I would have done it a long time ago. Our vocal cords, our vocal folds, more commonly nowadays they're called vocal folds, but I know that the YouTube audience is probably more used to hearing it called vocal cords, but know that those terms are interchangeable. These tissues have a set size. They're strings, essentially, that are vibrated with air. They are not plucked or fretted like other stringed instruments, and they grow to a set size. Why don't you have a child's voice when you're an adult? If we could have unlimited vocal ranges, why can't a kid just suddenly learn to have an adult's voice? Not true at all. There are always Guinness Book exceptions where some folks do have exceptionally wide vocal ranges, but they have to be physically gifted in the size and the shape of their vocal folds and their larynx in order to access a wide range of pitches. Now, most of the people that take lessons from me, including me when I took lessons, feel like their range is really expanding. Some folks are very, very lucky and they're able to expand it out quite far, but there is always a physical limit. And it does take training to get to our physical limit. So that's why it feels like our range just could possibly go on forever when we first start taking lessons. But after a few years, you get to this point where no matter how much you practice, you cannot overcome the range limitations of the physics of the chords that you have. The sad part is we can't change the vocal cords we have. You go through puberty, and however they change is how they change. In men, they typically lengthen, and in women, they just lengthen a little bit, just enough for us to sound like adults. But I actually have worked with women in commercial radio and other vocal acting things where they did not sound very much like an adult. Their larynx did not grow very much from childhood to adulthood, and they almost have sort of a childlike voice still as an adult. Think of actors that play roles like Bobby Hill or Bart Simpson. These have all been women historically. Most of the children's voices you see in cartoons are actually women, not actual children. It can be extreme in growth or extremely small, where the person's larynx doesn't grow at all. But the point is, by the time you're an adult, whatever larynx you have, you've got to deal with the vocal range you have. And this can be a little bit disheartening if it wasn't the vocal range you want. Like for me, going to college and finding out that not only am I not a soprano, I'm not even a mezzo, I'm a contralto, was a little bit hard to get my mind around, a little bit hard to adapt to. But what I learned from teaching people is almost everyone has about the same amount of octaves available to them once they practice. So it's really where your octaves start and end on the piano that gives you your vocal range. And this becomes liberating because this allows you to know where your physical limits might be while you're training and kind of what your good realistic goals are. And if you get beyond them, awesome. It also lets you know whose vocals in the original key fit in your vocal range. How frustrating would it be to be someone like me with an extremely low voice trying to sing someone like Mariah Carey or Ariana Grande or Ann Wilson, people with very high soprano voices in the same key. I would try to belt as hard as I can, and I could never actually sing the same styles in the same places. Now, granted, these folks can't sing as low as I can, but it's because our vocal ranges sit in totally different starting points on the piano. Once you know where the starting and ending point of your vocal range is, you can move the key of a song. I can cover that Mariah Carey song. I'm going to have to drop it quite a ways to fit where my octaves start and end. However, if we all have around the same amount of octaves, that means that you can actually move any song into any key. If you're not familiar with key changes or what that means, it means changing the starting point of a melody to a lower location. Or sometimes we want to move it up to a higher location. Say we're a high-voiced female trying to sing a song by a man. We actually may need to transpose the song up in that case instead of down. In the case of low voices, you're going to be doing a lot of transposing down. If you have a low voice and you're female, you might also feel like you sing a lot of male repertoire because a lot of tenor stuff will be comfortable and you won't have to change the key. If you don't play instruments yourself, you're going to have to do a little bit more research into moving the key and how to change and transpose songs. This is actually fairly easy with audio software. It does kind of warp the sound a bit, but it still will help you out. But I recommend looking for tutorials on that, learning a little bit more about that, or just simply working with a friend who is an instrumentalist and knows their theory and can kind of help you move some songs if they're uncomfortable. Let's get to the meat of today's thing though. What's the difference between a contralto and a mezzo? So the way I divide my vocal students up and figure out their ranges is by where the notes start and end. Usually we start with their lowest note because the lowest note for a mezzo and the lowest note for a contralto and the lowest note for a soprano are all different spots. They're 3 octaves to 3.5 octave range area, starts and ends in completely different places. And when we learn that, we can discern, well, are we really a contralto or are we a mezzo-soprano? So when we look at female voices, we have 4 roughly vocal range voice groupings that we can put people into. And it goes coloratura soprano, which is extremely high sopranos with the bright voices, whistle tones. We have regular soprano, then we have mezzo-soprano, and we have contralto. Most of the time, the women that I've seen that are called altos are actually what we call mezzo-sopranos. Contralto is extremely rare. That's me. You can hear from this unusually low, kind of deep speaking voice, even though I don't have a male larynx. To be a contralto is extremely rare as a female. It is less than 2% of women who are naturally contraltos like myself. And so odds are if you've been called an alto your whole life, you're probably a mezzo. Some people who've come to me and thought they were altos were actually sopranos. So what you do is you sing as far low as you can. Most people can get their lowest note before training. Sometimes they have to, but usually in the first lesson, I'm able to take people as low as they go. Learning to go as high as we can go can take a lot of training. So try to sing as low as you can go. If you're unfamiliar with instruments, you do need someone to help you figure out which note you're singing down to, because that's how you're going to know whether you're a contralto or a mezzo. So when I've coached mezzo-sopranos, even ones with incredibly dark voices who I thought were going to be contraltos, they typically can't sing any lower than D3. That's typically the cutoff points. Occasionally, I have had a mezzo whose lowest note is C3. So if we're looking at the piano and we call middle C C4, if you can sing way below that, the entire octave below that as a female, down to C3 or D3, you're looking at a mezzo-soprano voice probably. If you aren't getting past middle C very far and you're maybe even just hitting the A or the G, you're probably not a mezzo or a contralto. You're probably a soprano. If you can't get below middle C, you're definitely a soprano. It doesn't mean your range is any shorter, it just means that it starts a lot higher on that piano. If you're a contralto, you're gonna be able to sing to lows, which might seem a little bit obscene. And this would be all the way down to notes like G2 or F2. I'm gonna show you a couple of the pitches. When we're looking at a contralto female, I really do mean the G2 or the F2. Possibly the A2 I would accept as contralto territory as well. And this is because this almost identically mirrors a tenor vocalist. So this is the case for me and how I realized I was not actually a mezzo-soprano. I was actually a little bit lower, more like a tenor male or a contralto. If I were a mezzo, my lowest note would be C3 or D3, which sounds like this. It's right in this area. So, za, za. If you want to sing down to it, you're going to need to go do a little so, fa, mi, re, do. Try this. Za, 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 za. And then go lower. Za, 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 za. Za, 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 za. See if you can get down there. So if it's peaking out and you know that's not getting any more notes out, then you're definitely in mezzo-soprano territory. For me, it sounds pretty comfortable because I still have a few more notes to go as a contralto. We'll talk about the maximum potential ranges for a mezzo or a contralto on the high end in just a second. Let's look now at contralto and get down to the G2. So we're gonna start down here. I'm gonna start at the D3 and I'm actually gonna go down. La, 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 la. So, fa, mi, re, do. That is really like my last note. Some days I can get the F2. La. That's it though. But this is the difference between a mezzo and a contralto, okay? You're gonna have to train a lot. It took me absolutely a lot of years to get the full high range of my voice working, to reach my physical limits and my physical capability. Where we sing in public is not our full 3 to 3.5 octave vocal range. We typically sing in a much smaller tessitura, as we call it, the area in which you're actually singing instead of your full vocal range. This is the guides I've seen in almost everyone I've taught. There are exceptions. There are always people like Dimash who've got like 5 or 6 octave vocal ranges, but this is extremely rare. And again, there usually have to be a person who sort of hit the genetic lottery, who has actual vocal cords capable of singing that far. I've never had anybody like that for a student. In fact, I've only ever met one person in real life, period, who had a 5 octave vocal range. Out of hundreds of people that I've coached, nobody has had more than 4 octaves, and usually the typical average of most people is 3 to 3.5 total octaves from your lowest low to your highest high. And also, we need to subdivide that total range into our belt range as well. We cannot belt, rock, sing, nay, our full range in that, if you will, chest voice sound above 2.5 octaves typically. So there's a different limit there to which you cannot belt. Typically, contraltos have a max vocal range of like G2 up to B5, sometimes C6. This is pretty much, I would say, my consistent vocal range is G2 to B5. And my performable vocal range is typically C3 to G5. And my belting limitations for contraltos would be G2 to probably about C5. But at first, you may feel like you can only belt to about A4. And it took me years to get up to the C5. Occasionally, I can also get at a D5 now, but that is a little bit tough. But it can be done with someone with a contralto voice with enough training and technique. And then when we're looking at mezzo-sopranos, we're actually looking at people with vocal ranges from about D3 or C3 all the way up to D6. Some of my mezzos can actually sing up to E6 as well, but they still sing to the D3 or the C3 on the bottom. And their belt range maximums typically end up being C3 or D3 all the way up to E5. Sometimes I've had people belting F5s as a mezzo. It depends on how bright or dark the voice is. Usually when we get to F5 and G5 and full belt, we're in soprano territory. But if you have like a brighter tone to your mezzo-soprano vocal range, you can push your belt range just a hair higher. And so that's typically what I've seen in vocal clients. Most people actually do fit those ranges, and it is not that common to see exceptions. If you have gotten your low notes, you followed me along and you realized you were probably a mezzo or something, but you don't have these high ends yet, do not panic. I did not either. I had to do a lot of training and practice, especially when you have a low voice. It is a bit heavy. It's hard to carry up the scale. Don't force it. I would say start transposing songs a little lower. Most people cannot tell that you've moved the song, but they can tell if you screw up the high notes. So there's absolutely no shame and nothing wrong with moving songs until you're more comfortable with your full vocal range. You might hear people like mezzo-sopranos singing songs that you think you should be able to sing, but maybe technically you're not ready for. Doesn't mean that they have a higher voice than you. They could have the exact same vocal range. Just means technically you're at a different level at this moment. Thanks everybody for watching the Voicehacks channel. Let me know what you want to learn about next. I'll be back with more fun stuff and tutorials for you all very soon.